Hi, and welcome to Office Hours. If you want to learn more about what we do, head over to officehours.global. And the way that our show works is the first hour is usually Q&A on media and production, and then the second hour we dive deep into a topic that you want to know about. And today we're talking about group projects. As we just had OH Space, we've got the Mobley Process. So we want to find out what we're going to discuss. What are we going to do next? And we want to hear from you. Next, tomorrow we'll be talking about shading with our Black Magics and the ATEM switchers because they're so powerful and there's so much that you can do. So you want to return for that. And on Wednesday, we'll talk about the OH graphics. And on Thursday, we'll go behind the scenes to find out how they did the magic last week. And on Friday, it is our second anniversary. Can you believe that we've been at this for 2 years? And on Saturday, that's our long day. It's our graduation. It's our education hour. And the first hour is Q&A. And then we'll be talking about Keynote. We'll be doing a Keynote workshop. And on the third hour, it's not streamed. So you have to make sure that you're signed up for Zoom. And then on Sunday, that's more of our philosophical day where we talk about the why and the who and the how of office hours. So let's get this party started. Bill?
Thank you, Liberty. Here we go. Our first question this morning comes from Douglas Carmichael. And Douglas says, Alex mentioned that one reason tracks are used for large broadcast events with minimal sound check time is that the complexity of modern music production. What's the secret to complex studio music mixes without overloading your CPU?
Courtney.
I think what Alex was referring to was the connectivity issues of a halftime show where you have to roll a stage onto the field and get sound from that stage into the mix facility. And it's to try and get all the instruments in and balanced and everything would be just too heroic. Plus the RFs considerations in a typical venue like that are tremendous. There are numbers, hundreds of wireless microphones being used. So in a studio situation, you offload, usually the more complex studio setups, a lot of the digital signal processing is done in the mix panel itself. They all have DSPs and all of the effects and everything are done in the mix panel, not by your CPU. Your CPU may just be tracking or recording, or you may have a separate dedicated device just for tracking. In most larger productions, it's usually not a problem. There's enough CPU or digital processing enabled to handle all the plugins and all the special effects you're going to need. And also, they do use larger computers.
Alex.
Yeah, there are dedicated DSP boards for, when it's software based. And when we're talking about live events for broadcast, they're still hardware based. So we don't see, you do see some of it. I mean, there are events that get done with Pro Tools and so on and so forth. But it's by and large, those are large decks that or large mixing panels that have, as Courtney said, dedicated processors. But yeah, to underline what Courtney said, I was just talking about the amount of time they had to outload it. It takes us a lot of time to tune everything to be great. It's not that you can't do it. It's just that you can't do it well. And so, unplugging things and plugging things back in is always dangerous.
Next question.
Next one comes from Joseph Mueller in, it looks like Guelph, Ontario, Canada. And he says, in Office Hour Spaces live stream, I did not see camera operators in the closing credits. Who were they?
John.
Alex, I don't know. Are we on this Thursday? Is that on the schedule?
You are, but we'll go ahead and answer a couple of questions now. But we'll have a longer, in-depth discussion on Thursday.
So we're redoing the credits because we left a lot of people out, and there was some wrong titling on there. So we've got some updated media coming on Thursday. We'll have that all corrected.
Awesome. Next question.
Next one comes up from Joaquin Matus in Imperial Valley, California. He says, many productions I worked on have different points along signal chains where audio is embedded, some embedding into the switcher itself and others bypassing the switcher entirely. Where do you embed audio in your chain and what devices do you use?
Jeffrey.
Out of the grand scheme of things, audio is always number one in all of my productions. Video comes a second, and then lag is just third. That way, that's the reason why I always bypass any type of switch or anything like that, and make sure that the audio is as pristine as possible. So if it can go through the switcher so it can sync up perfect, that's fine. But if there's a little bit of lag, I can always fix that a little bit later. And as long as the audio is perfect, that's my biggest goal.
Alex?
Yeah, this show is actually, I believe, being embedded for a variety of reasons in the actual switcher. We have a lot of control right before it goes in, and for a variety of reasons, it's there. 99% of the projects that I do, though, it is after the switcher. So we usually have a dedicated embedding piece of hardware, and that can be a variety of different things that will merge those two together. That way, if we have any issues with the switcher or we have anything else, we still have a way to do signal. And usually that's going through a router, so we can literally reroute and so on and so forth. So especially if you're using multiple switchers, primary and a backup, you want to make sure that the audio gets added at the end. To do that. And typically most switchers aren't good at handling audio. So again, we're in a controlled environment. We're doing it with this show, but it's not for what we do for big streams. We generally embed it after the switcher.
Mitchell?
For this program, I do it by embedding it into my FX3 Sony camera right at the front. And I do that because the ATEM is lousy at handling audio. You don't want to use those inputs. It's okay, but it's not great. The Sony's much better. The preamps in it are much better. And if it's a post-production issue, you've got embedded audio along with the files you're working with. So you can move it, sync it, adjust it anywhere you want to. But in production, live, particularly a Zoom call, I do it up front.
Good stuff. Next question.
Adrian Albeck is back in Brisbane, Australia, and he says, can the second HDMI output of a Raspberry Pi be utilized for anything? A key fill channel for graphics, maybe?
Alex?
Yeah, I don't think that the Raspberry Pi can do that well. So I'm not sure. It could probably use it for something, but using it for key fill, I think you have trouble keeping the frames synced up, and that's a problem on almost any computer doing HDMI out. Is keeping both HDMI outputs synced perfectly, because if they're off by even a frame, you'll notice it.
Next question.
Guy Cochran in Seattle, USA says, does PowerPoint do anything better than Keynote?
Jason?
PowerPoint updates better than any application I've ever seen. No, not that I can think of.
I was like, really? You had me roped there, David.
I don't know if it does it better, but I will tell you that I struggle with Keynote in that it is always taking over all of my displays, unless you do the play in window, in which case you don't have access or easy access to your presenter notes. It just takes over your entire computer with every display that comes along with it. It's really frustrating.
Courtney?
Well, there's one thing that PowerPoint does that Keynote does not do, and that's very major for a lot of people, and that is it works on everything. Keynote only works on something that has a little picture of some fruit on it. For some reason.
Yeah, that's what they're saying in the chat. Eric says it works on a PC. George?
Obviously, PowerPoint strength is going to work. We use it a lot more in general sessions. I know you're not talking about Keynote, but Keynote has got its major strengths as far as you're able to take a Mac and push it down to your DSMs if you're not going to use a switcher to route. Keynote is stronger for a video-centric environment or production, that you're able to just take a Mac and push to different places just by using the displays.
Jeffrey?
And if you're using Office 365, it integrates really well. You can do some scripting back and forth. Have a spreadsheet set up for certain things, and bring that in that way. Whereas I'm not sure if Keynote does that with their stuff, but that's a great thing to be able to just do and macro out.
Bill?
I was going to say general business universality. And what I mean by that is that literally almost every large, medium, and small even business that I've dealt with and a production site, they almost all license the Office suite. So it's everywhere in the corporate world. So 99 times out of 100, they start talking about PowerPoint first because they know that so well. And it's only when they're doing something in production that we can generally switch them off to Keynote because it's better in terms of the graphics compatibility and we can get better stuff out of it. But PowerPoint is just everywhere.
John?
Mr. Fenwick says PowerPoint runs best on a PC. Enough said.
Next question.
Moving on, the next one comes to us from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, the Samsung T5 has been a frequently recommended SSD, but I'm looking for a 4 terabyte SSD. Would the SanDisk Extreme be a reliable external choice?
Jason.
Yes, it would be. If you look at Blackmagic's site, the SanDisk, specifically Extreme Pro Portable SSD V2 SD SSD E81, is absolutely recommended for, up to 12K DCI at Blackmagic Raw 8:1.
George?
You didn't mention what are you trying to use it in post-production or just for a backup? The Extremes are good, but I would look, if you're doing post-production, I would look for something a little bit more faster, maybe on the OWC side or G-Tech.
Mitchell?
SanDisk Ultra Extreme is fine. The Ultra is a little better, and I don't have the specs that Jason was mentioning, but I would think the Ultra is going to be faster and better for you.
Next question.
Joseph Mueller in Guelph, Ontario, Canada, says the OfficeHour space rocket launch site looked very dusty. It's an understatement of the day. How did the audio-visual equipment survive? Were you able to clean out all the dust, any damaged equipment?
Yes, Guelph, Ontario. Nigel?
Yes, I don't know about the damaged equipment, but there was really dust everywhere. And I wanted to thank Victor for teaching myself and my wife how to clean everything with the cleaning stuff that Noah brought with him, but more importantly, how to roll cables, which he had to break my habits. And so that was a very good skill. My wife's better at it than I am. But I have to tell you, Noah brought an incredible amount of technology, and he was very smart to bring the wipes to clean it all down.
John?
So I didn't get a report back from Noah yet. I think Chris has talked to him. Wednesday night, we had a barbecue on the lake bed, and the lake bed, as it often does, goes from 0 mile an hour to 40 mile an hour winds. And a nice camera, went flying into the dirt and was covered with dirt, but it was cleaned up and it was fine. So I haven't got the final report yet.
And Bill?
I'm just saying, if I slapped my leg right now, dust would come off of me, and I've taken 3 showers since I got off the lake bed. So the answer to this is a universal yes, it was everywhere. It's tolerable because it's pretty fine, but boy, it's just made for some beautiful shots off toward the sunset and the sunrise. I will say that dust can be helpful in terms of aesthetics.
Next question.
Guy Cochran, Seattle. Bill captured some footage over the weekend. What format did he shoot in, and how will it flow through post-production, ingest to deliverable?
Bill.
I guess so. So I decided, since I wasn't sure I was going to be able to make it out to the last minute, my wife had a gig that we didn't know if it was going to extend over. So I decided that I was going to, rather than commit to a job that I wouldn't be able to finish, that I was going to take care of B-roll mostly. So my main rig was my iPhone on a tethered, not a tethered, but a wireless monopod. And I want to do that specifically because I thought it would be a really cool shot to get on my bicycle, drive around the lake bed a little bit, and get a camera right just a few inches off the lake bed. So I did a camera on my iPhone iPhone 12 Plus, and then I wirelessly connected it through Filmic Remote to my old iPhone 10 up here, so I had a viewfinder, and I rode around, and it was just fun to be able to do something like that. So thank you to the technology gods for making that possible. So I have that footage. I have a few other kind of steady cams. Oh, it was on a DJI Osmo that was mounted to the monopod, which allowed me to get steady shots throughout the course of my riding around on my bicycle. It was just fun to shoot. Those kind of things, when you're doing something different, and you can't really fail because everybody else has the main stuff covered. You just try things that are unique, and some of them I think work pretty well. So you'll see that in the final program if it makes its way in.
Yeah, especially for the kind of experience that it was, having those different angles to give us like that real 360 is awesome. John?
I got two birds.
Go for cam.
I got 2 birds talking in my ear. They said, but how do we get that footage, Bill?
Well, I stopped by the house to roll it off, but nobody was there to take it. So we'll get it there. We'll put it up on Frame.io, or we'll toss it through Dropbox or something. We'll get it into this master control.
Nice. Next question.
Next one comes from Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida. Which external drive do you recommend for recording on an ATEM Mini Extreme ISO? How many ISOs are safe to record? Thanks.
Jason?
As long as I'm in the studio, I actually skip all of that entirely, and I use the desk, rack mounted piece, and it works pretty much perfectly with pretty much anything I throw at it. As far as how many, technically this one can do 2 simultaneous records with 2 USB-C ends.
Alex? You might be on mute, Alex.
Sorry, I set my T down. My button was on the other side of the T, and I was like, I got to move this to this to this. I would. You should be able to get all the ISOs from one of these. They're H.264 records. They're not ProRes files, and so it should be able to record all 8 channels from the ISO. And it is. I use the T5s. I know that it doesn't take very long. I don't really record things that are very long on the switcher. Mostly, if I'm going to move to anything longer, I start isolating those into decks on their own.
George?
T5s, but I try to stick to the 1 terabytes. Instead of just getting a big 2 terabyte, I just get multiple 1 terabyte T5s so I could pull out as I needed and just put in a fresh one.
And Jeffrey?
For portable stuff, I have the SanDisk Extreme, which works really well. However, I also have this OWC dual drive, because it's got 2 drives in it, and it's also a dock, so I could actually plug in my Extreme into that, and it would actually see that and switch to that hard drive if I run out of space on this dual drive, which is about 2 terabytes worth of data, because I don't have it rated or anything like that.
Next question.
Adrian Alback in Brisbane, Australia says, could the Blackmagic Design Smart Monitor 4K be considered as a reference monitor or suitable for grading if used with a Decklink Duo card and a Thunderbolt interface?
Jason?
I don't know. I mean, I have one right here, and I've never used it for grading. I'm generally, I'd say probably in a pinch.
Alex?
No. You cannot use that as a grading monitor. It's not built for that. So there's just a level of, you're paying more for those monitors because they do a lot more they basically throw a lot more screens away like that's, or move them to other monitors. They're testing those monitors much more heavily. And it takes a lot more to get consistency to make sure that they're going to respond exactly. That's the different set of electronics inside, a different level of quality of the screen, and that's why they cost more. But I would definitely not consider. I've owned many of these smart monitors. They are relatively accurate, but they're not color accurate.
I've killed a couple too, so they're not super dexterous, shall we say?
We just lost one.
And Courtney?
Yeah, most of that has already been said. Yeah, I wouldn't use it for color grading. I haven't had much luck with Blackmagic's monitors. I think they're better with their acquisition equipment. I've found their monitors to be a little bit lacking, but this one I have not tried, and it does have full resolution, which is good in this size panel for monitoring the content, but not the color accuracy of your.
And I want to be clear. I think it's an incredible value. We've bought a lot of them. We use a lot of them. We just don't use them for color. Like we use them for, color grading is an entirely different level of accuracy than just using a monitor. And so as a rack mountable monitor that does a lot of great things and gives us a couple of signals and everything else, they're incredible bang for your buck. But they're not color grading monitors.
Next question.
Paul Buchan in Columbus, Ohio is up next. He says, I'm looking to follow some new people and organizations on Twitter. Interested to hear the panel's recommendations. They don't have to be tech related.
Alex?
I was a little distracted earlier because I was trying to find, who do I follow on Twitter that I should recommend? There's some obvious ones, Andy Anako and Renee Ritchie. Tyler Stallman is a great one. Steve Brazel. Paul Graham is not really in media, but I find his comments to be useful. Jason Diamond. Those are a couple of the ones that pop out. And again, very unscientifically, I just went and looked at my list and what have I been doing? Or what have I been following?
George?
So Alex already mentioned a few. Obviously, if you're not following Alex already, Alex Lindsay, John Baker. I'm just doing the local folks. The Stan Chan is on Twitter. I try to follow all the local folks, but MKBHD, he's a good one to follow. Also his studio. He has put out a lot of good content, but just a couple I would recommend.
And I would say some of the people, well, I follow more hashtags than whoever I'm already following because typically it'll be like, oh, this is someone who that's just discoverability. I'm always researching. So like Web3, NFTs. If there was a person like Christo, I'm a big fan of him and he does a lot in the Twitter spaces. So always great content there. So those are just some of how I use Twitter. And sorry, got so caught up into me answering. Jason.
I'm blanking. Who is the guy that works for Bloomberg now, Alex, that was on MacBreak last week?
Mark Gurman.
Yeah, Mark Gurman.
Yeah, and I would obviously be remiss to not mention that Justine Esrick is a lot of fun to. Justine is a lot of fun to follow both on YouTube and Twitter. She usually has some fun comments, and she's pretty techie.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, how is the equipment in the Model X Office Hour Space Command vehicle powered?
John.
You know, this is pretty ironic because all of us brought a generator except for 1F Jeff, who needed to have generator power. So we had several generators out there powering the X.
Okay. Next question.
The Seventh Scroll in Brooklyn, New York. The couple says, Pretto and Office Hour Space Crew, any idea when is the next launch? Oh, they're all ready after you. Do more, John. Also, any more patches left?
John.
Planning on the subsequent follow-up or sequential follow-up. And hit me up in Discord for patches. I have about 20 left. That's it.
Nice. Next question.
David Paskin here on the panel, Miami, Florida. Anyone else struggling to get universal control to work seamlessly with two Macs with multiple displays?
Jason?
I haven't tried it yet with two Macs with multiple displays. I've tried it with one Mac with multiple displays and an M1 Mini without. It's been pretty good for me. I know that some people have had issues with it. If you reboot everything and make sure iCloud is good, I bet you'll be all right. Also, be sure that you update HomeKit. That can mess with it.
Alex?
So, David, what's your how many monitors on how many computers?
I've got a Mac Studio and a MacBook Pro. Each of them, the Mac Studio is running 3 monitors. The MacBook Pro is also running 3 monitors. One of those is connected via DisplayLink.
And are you able to get to all of them or any of them?
I am. It's just finicky. Every once in a while, it will disconnect and I'll have to go in and press buttons and I don't have any idea what I'm doing. But
and you said one is the DisplayLink. That's that little doubler.
Yeah, it basically turns a monitor into a USB. I can use a USB port to.
So my first thing would be to unplug that and see how everything works. so I think that's it's doing it's not a standard item for it and for something brand new. I bet you they didn't think about supporting that, and it could be running. It wouldn't be just that monitor. It could run the whole system. Could be destabilized by putting something in that is not part of kind of the standard issue outputs. So that'd be the first thing that I would take out. How's the studio?
I love it.
Okay, all right.
There was so much joy in his face.
It's pretty.
Yeah, it's pretty fast.
Yeah. Jason?
The only thing that I would add to that would be I've yet to see universal control fail if you hard plug the iPad in.
Next question.
Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Canada comes up next. Are PZM mics dead? They were very popular with conference room video systems. Anyone have any experience with them? I've used Crown PZMs in the past.
Before you answer that, Alex, PZM, which ones? I know I've heard the PTZs. Which ones are the PZM?
These are the surface-based. I believe they're basically these kind of surface-based mics that use the surface to actually pick up content. If I remember correctly, I haven't used one for a long time. Fundamentally, the issue with PZMs, as I remember it, is that the audio quality isn't great, and a lot of our multi-point. What's become more in fashion for conference rooms are phased or basically matrices of mics that are going to pick things up rather than these. They're working a lot better than the individual mics that we used to kind of push out. And so, and I think that what's also happening is that we're starting to realize that most of our conference rooms didn't sound very good for a long time. And so a lot more is being put on it. So things that were easy are starting to get replaced by things that are good.
Jeffrey?
So PZM microphone stands for pressure zone microphone. And yeah, they are basically meant for boundary microphones. If you're on stage, you put them on the ends of there. I used them in a very interesting way for conferences when I did roundtables. I'd actually put them in between 2 or 3 different people. That way I would be able to catch a zone of that asking questions. And of course, if you do that, you have to put a lot of padding underneath it, or else you get a lot of the table noise, a lot of the clicking of the keyboards and things like that. The other use I have for them is they're great for music. In a bass drum, you can get them towards the front head, which gives you more of a tacky sound, less of a resonance sound. You can put them into a piano right on the tack them right on the lid, so they can really capture the inside of the sound. And you can even box them in like on a guitar amp, so they'll capture that sound without capturing the surrounding sound. So they still work a lot in music.
Mitchell?
I agree with Jeffrey. A lot of the technology in a PZM mic has moved over to studio recording, and as he said, in a piano, it's brilliant. But in a conference room, there's a lot better technology out there, especially the phased array microphones that Alex referred to.
Bill?
Yeah, I think the biggest downside of PZM's pressure zone modulation, I heard it as, is that they just can't defeat physics, and you would get somebody who's 1 foot or 2 feet away from the microphone in the center of the table, and then somebody at the end of a long converse table who was 8 feet away. And the inverse square principle just always works with microphones that, you move from 1 foot to 5 feet, that's 25 times less sound pressure hitting that microphone capsule. So that person is going to sound far distant, even with the technology, because those boundary mics use the actual plane of the table as a reflectance to get sound into them and to keep some of the echoey out of it. They still, to me, have never sounded good for their primary intent, which is why I think they became kind of more and more specialist microphones over the course of time.
Courtney?
Yeah, most everything's been said. The pressure zone microphones have the element facing a flat table or a piece of plexiglass or something that is reflecting the sound into the microphone. So they're fairly wide in their acceptance angle. They're not very directional at all. They're almost always omnidirectional. So they're good if you need to pick up a large group of people in a circle or something, but and they reduce echo by being picking up only the reflected sound and not the original sound. So that's their reason for existence, is to reduce room noise of room echo, multiple reflections. So you're picking up a primary reflection just as it comes off of that flat surface. And that's how they work. But these days, these AI algorithms that are used in steerable multi-mic pickups are much better at eliminating room noise and focusing the directionality of a microphone to give you a much stronger signal to noise ratio.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Ray Franklin in Mount Dora, Florida. In the effort to make a TV show for Office Hours 2.0, we have Fenwick Face diagram, but we have many who don't look at the home audience. Answers to the audience should look into the camera. You are on TV, Ray notes for us.
George?
So I'm looking into the camera right now. That's because over the 2 years we've been here, I've made a conscious effort to look into I have a prompter, so I'm looking into the prompter. So it's kind of tricky for all of us to be on a prompter, and we might not have the space. So, it's just about installing that prompter or just making a conscious effort to look at the camera. So Ray's kind of tricky, but I'm sure we're going to get to that point where everyone is going to be able to look directly into the camera installing the prompter.
Alex?
Yeah, I think this is a case where you're really fighting a million years of evolution. We're designed to look at something that we can respond to ourselves or somebody else. And so it's really, really hard to look straight into the camera for most people when they're on broadcast, because it's just they don't have anything in front of them if they don't have a teleprompter. And so I think that's going to be the challenge. And also you have a lot of people that just haven't done it before, and they've been talking on Zoom for the last 2 years, and they're just kind of used to doing it exactly the way they do it. So I think that's the hardest part.
Bill?
Also, a lot of us came out of radio, and you know, in radio, you often have a lot of things that you're checking. You know, meters over there, and some notices over there, and there's wire copy down here, and so you talk, but you don't really concern yourself with where you're looking. So this is kind of a new thing, and there are, I think, far fewer people who have had television training and who have set up something like a teleprompter where, okay, if I'm looking there, I know I struggle with it all the time. And part of it's because I have to read questions and I can only read them if I'm over there. So I have to remind myself constantly, look back, address the audience. It's just a habit thing.
Yeah, the multitasking of all that we have going on behind the scenes. Mitchell?
Looking into the camera, like what is an interrogator is the old term for it, is pretty easy. I have a small home stream device made by ICANN that's not very big, and it just connects to the top of the front of my camera, and it's $200. So everybody can have one of these, and the fact it's called home stream, I guess they targeted it for the average person out there. So welcome, Mr. Average.
And it's Interatron is the Aaron Morris, and it's and Courtney will remind us that he didn't invent it, but he did brand it.
Mitchell, can you hold it up again, because it was kind of moving around just to see. Okay, copy that. Dang, just a slow-mo. There we go, panning. Thank you, George.
And Ray, let me just say, I think we all want to do it. And when I do look back at office hours and shows that I've been on, I cringe because a lot of times I'm talking, you know, and my eyes, you know, we all trying to keep contact, but it's just habitual that I don't really focus on the monitor all the time.
And David?
I just wanted to add that having a teleprompter has absolutely changed the way I teach, the way I engage in digital space. I can look at it. The people who are watching know that I know that they're there because I'm looking at them, and that they are more important than any content that I'm sharing. And to me, that's the best of this space.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Kyle Hammond in Chicago, Illinois. He says, in the process of acquiring Mac Studio, I saw somewhere that there was not a remarkable difference between the 24 versus the 32 core. Is that worth it?
Jason?
You need to understand there are only a few cases where you're going to be able to push it in a way that you'll be able to actually see the difference. And if you don't know what they are, then you probably don't need it.
Alex?
The only thing to think about is that usually I buy these computers and I use them for quite some time. So I will, I'm not pressuring them as I used to buy one every year or every 2 years. Now I buy a main computer every 4 or 5 years. And so a lot of times those cores don't mean anything today, but you have to kind of project where you're going to be in 2 or 3 or 4 years, and are they going to be useful then? And so if I'm going to commit to it, I'll usually commit to a higher core count.
Nigel?
Yeah, I guess you're talking about the Max rather than the Ultra. And if I look at the difference in the price between those two models you suggested, it's about $200. I have to tell you the next jump up, which is to 48 cores, is $1,400, by which time you could have jumped to the Ultra. So I don't know whether, again, it's all about the application and what you're using it with. But that 200 doesn't seem a lot compared to the next jump that comes with it. I have one now running to the side of me, and there's so far just cool air coming out the back, but I've yet to do anything with it, so I'll let you know if it gets hotter.
Mitchell? Sorry, go ahead.
And you
Alex.
got the Ultra?
I got the Ultra, but the low end of the Ultra, so the 48 core one, because I don't think I'm going to push 64.
And you like it?
Well, so far I just turned it on this morning because I've been in the desert for 4 days. So it was almost enough to make me cancel the trip to the desert. So it's been, I have to tell you, it's one of the most overpackaged things Apple's done in a long time. I don't know quite what they're so sensitive to, because they put a $3,000 laptop in a box. This thing comes overpackaged, I think. But
how about the ritual?
Yeah, well, it was a ritual.
Mitchell?
Nigel, when you're cleaning the dust out of it, does it take longer to clean 24 cores or 34 cores or 32 cores?
Actually, I actually think the more interesting question is why on the lower model are there so many different graphics core options? Is this a binning problem? Was this a design question? Are they having failures in the chips? I'd be really interested to know whether they are all 64s where some of the graphics cores didn't work, or would they physically created another different die? That would be, because that's an interesting question.
I agree with you, and I agree with Alex also. It depends on what application you're using. If the application isn't properly multi-threaded, then you're probably not going to see a difference between them, but maybe something down the road you put in there will. Like Cinema 4D is well written and will take advantage of all those cores. So you'd want to lean towards the 32.
I was going to say one last thing. Sorry I should have put my hand up. I did hand this off to Leo and for his studio, and he put my little project, my Metashape project in, and he sent me pictures of it. Just all. Did he talk about it on? I didn't hear it.
It worked.
It was just all maxed out.
He actually showed a picture of every single core completely maxed out.
Yeah, that's the one thing about Metashape is that you can just take all your cores and just let them run free. Did he talk about it? I think the last time he gave me an update, it had been running for like 18 hours.
That's it took about 18, 19 hours total, I think.
Yeah. It was cool.
Next question.
Liberty White in Atlanta, Georgia says, if you were to produce a live stream in a remote area in Kenya, for example, how would you deal with the internet connectivity?
And I just want to preface, I should have put my hand up. Sorry, back end team. So I've got a friend who is doing some kids' content out there, and they want to stream from there, and then they're just not sure about like the best places. Are there extra devices? What kind of tools? And I invited her to like come into after hours, because that's a great place to have this discussion. So there you go, Alex.
So I've done a couple streams out of Kenya, and there's basically 3 different ways that we've done it. The most common way for us to do it is a satellite truck. So there are definitely sat trucks in Kenya that they're mostly sports trucks. So they do soccer games and that type of thing. And so but there's definitely quite a few out of Nairobi, and that can obviously drive to. There's some places they won't drive to, but there's definitely for depending on how far out and where you're going. Those sat trucks are pretty good. They'll set up in the morning and be broadcasting that afternoon. And, if it's not raining, they'll do great. They're typically KU trucks. And then you'd be surprised at how good the cellular service is in large parts of Kenya. Kenya, I think about a decade ago, gave up on landlines, and they just focused all of their energy on cellular services. And so they had to pick one or the other. It's a lot of open space. So, I would look at that. Look at universities that might be nearby. So if you're in a university or near it, it can be far off. There's a university network inside of, there's a very large set of fiber cables coming into Mombasa. And so if you're in that region, a lot of the universities are going to have incredible speeds. Like we did a stream out of a university there that had 600 up and down, wow. Fiber with like a ping of like 11, and so it is, so it's not necessarily that you're completely out of range, and then the other side of that is that you can, if that university is line of sight, of course, to wherever you're going, or you can bounce it. Of course, you can use things like air fiber to get to it if you find one of those areas. But Kenya has actually got, because that's one of the landing points for the fiber around Africa. There's actually some pockets there that have an incredible amount of bandwidth.
Okay. And so they're a school, so I don't know if they have satellite budget.
Are they a college or a small school?
A small school.
They probably don't have, they may or may not have it, but check it to make sure. And also just check sometimes in the town or in the city, there's somebody that has really fast, internet. I mean, that's what we find in Rwanda a lot. Rwanda has a whole fiber network. And so, you just got to figure out where the smaller villages don't have it, but the larger towns will definitely have fiber somewhere. You just have to figure out who has it.
Copy that. Jeffrey.
And if it doesn't have to be done to the minute exactly live, then what you can do is you can record and then send and have a station set up that's dedicated, where you have a host that's going back and forth, probably playing some pre-recorded content, and then maybe somebody does their camera work and then brings the card back to you and run it that way. That way you have one solid connection, and then go from there. But it also sounds like what we just did this weekend at the desert is going to be the same thing. So hopefully Starlink could even be a possibility there too.
Yeah, thanks. As you started speaking, I was like, that's what we saw this weekend. So thank you for that. George?
So this is for Alex, actually. Just a quick comment. So moving forward to the future, because it's difficult being from the Caribbean, everything is ran underwater as far as bringing power from somewhere else. I mean, bringing fiber underwater could be a little more challenging or difficult. Do you see it being in the air for the continent and other places that really don't have that infrastructure? And how can we make sure that when we do put it in the air or in the sky, that the bandwidth is going to be maintained?
The biggest problem that they have generally, I mean, in a lot of these countries is oversaturation, in of the available infrastructure. So, for instance, the LTE in Rwanda was really good when no one was using it, but they just couldn't manage the amount. So now they're running fiber through everything. Fiber is still, glass is still a really efficient way to move large amounts of data at a very low latency. And so, you are seeing more countries in Africa, still running fiber to a lot of those places, and then they're mostly using cellular for the rest of it. I don't think that there's any ground stations right now in Africa for the Starlinks. So the Starlinks they're over Africa, but they don't have ground stations to match, And so now there's discussions about whether they need the ground stations everywhere too. They can mesh it and have a higher latency to get through that, but that's not, to my knowledge, that's not available yet. So those are still issues there. But most of the time it's been cellular, and then also air fiber. Some version of air fiber, which is if you get point to point, you can get relatively good connections with the large enough dish, and we see these all over the place of moving stuff around. So to smaller villages, that's where they're going. Otherwise, they do the infrastructure. They had a lot of stops and starts. One of the problems was to save money. They tried to do basically they didn't put the fiber very low in the ground, and the problem was that the farmers were angry that there was so much money being spent on the fiber and not on things they needed, and so they cut the fibers. That's one
way to solve it.
Yeah, the government solved it, but part of it was redigging it and putting it a little lower, and so but I think that it's moving through. I think we're going to see a lot of fiber mixed with cellular is going to be the big solution, and you still in some pockets now get some. There's a lot of people on cell phones that are getting a pretty good connection. Part of it is because everyone's on cell phones. It's easier to spend money on cellular because no one has a home line anymore. I mean, not no one, but almost nobody has a home line at this point. So it's a different. They're actually leapfrogging us in that respect.
Okay. And Alex, was there something else to add? Because you were next, even though George.
I think all I was going to say is that the Starlink stuff isn't up yet.
Okay.
And probably won't be up. I think it has to do with the ground stations.
Copy that. Next question.
The next one, and actually the one after that, comes from Ronnie Hofsey in Tromsø, Norway, and they're pretty close together. How to get the best audio in a reverberating boardroom in different places, and the one following that is how to capture in reverberating boardrooms with 10 to 12 persons in different venues for a mobile.
Let's keep them separate.
Okay. So the first one is just how to get best audio in a reverberating boardroom in different places.
Yikes. Mitchell.
I assume it's the same boardroom, but in different places inside the room. The best place to solve the reverberation problem is to treat the room. The other way is if you can't treat the room, that's the garbage truck outside, so I've got a reverberation problem, is to use more microphones and make sure that you have more people covered, and then use a device that I'm sure Alex is going to talk about called automix to control the volume from each mic. Because the more mics that are open, the more reverberation you're going to have.
Sorry, I'm a little confused because we moved the question to a weird place here. There we go. I'm going to pull that one back.
Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Get 1 second here. I'm just going to. Okay. Sorry. It's very hard for me to concentrate on that. So exactly what Mitchell said. You have to treat the room, and if you don't, you have to close the distance between the mics and the people. That's what's happening. So, A, the room is reverberating, and B, the mics are too far away, so that when you turn the mics up, they're picking up the noise floor, which is the reverberation. So there's two places to go there. You can get, these are podium mics, or these are lav mics. They have little ones you can drop in your pocket that will be much closer to the person talking. But those are the kind of things that will greatly improve your audio. And as we move towards what I will say is that I think I've worked in a lot of corporate environments. Corporations have to rethink their conference rooms. period. That they're no longer like, oh, we might bring somebody in. No one is coming back permanently. I mean, like there's some people that are going to come back, but you're not going to have, 20, 30, 40, 50% of your workforce in the future is not going to be in the office and not coming to that conference room. And all of us have dealt with corporations' bad conference rooms for the last couple decades, and it's over. Like you have to fix your conference rooms, and make them sound good. And you should, executives and managers should connect to their own conference room and talk to people over it and decide, can I actually hear what they're talking about? Because they can't.
Bill?
What Alex said, all of what Alex said, there's one more thing, and that is just understanding signal to noise ratio. And that is how much signal, and that is the person speaking in this case in a boardroom talking environment, versus noise, which is anything that isn't the signal. So reverberation is a noise in that respect. And signal to noise ratio is always first and foremost have to do with the ratio of the distance between the primary pickup and the source of the thing. So the closer you get a mic, up to and including using a little head-worn mic that's right at the corner of your mouth, that will increase your signal to noise ratio tremendously because it works with the physics of the inverse square principle. So literally, now you can't always get an executive to wear a big headset. They do have some very small ones that are almost invisible. They use all sorts of mics in Broadway that you can't see. But if you're not going to that extreme, the next best thing after a head-worn is probably a lavalier. And then as you get off to even a gooseneck mic, unless somebody moves up their mouth to right next to it, all of those are going to be a little less signal-to-noise ratio. So the reverberance of the room, if it's untreated, as everybody has said here, will give you worse and worse results. So get mics close is the number one solution to this. Failing anything else technical.
And Nigel?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add, there are two questions for noise here. What's the noise outside the room? And are you trying to insulate noise from outside? And then the noise inside the room. And obviously the proximity of the mics is pretty important. My guess is if it's a boardroom in a fairly established large company, they are going to be very sensitive to you either trying to fix the sound from outside or fix the sound from inside by changing the room. Actually, the better approach is to change the meeting and what you're trying to do and not try and replicate the board meetings of old virtually in that environment. You actually really have to rethink the meeting as well.
Next question.
And this is this attendant question from Ronnie. He says, how to capture best audio in a reverberating boardroom with 10 to 12 persons in different venues for a mobile kit, lavs, shotguns, table array, gooseneck, or what? There's no PA. This is for streaming only.
Courtney?
Yeah, there are several companies, Shure being one of them, that have these new gooseneck operated. Plus, they integrate with handhelds as well if you can have somebody walking around speaking into them. They're all wireless systems. They're digital. The Shure ULXD system is a digital conference room system. It has a rack mount that goes in a portable case. You can put it into a gator case or something with a rack mount for the receivers. And then the transmitters all sit in little units that are battery powered and can be placed around the table with the gooseneck mic. That solves the problem of reducing the reverberation by getting the microphone close to each individual person. And it handles the steering between the different microphones and auto mix, fading up, fading down, and opening them. Or you can have them keyed as well. So this person has to actually press a button on his or her gooseneck to activate their microphone. And they have tally lights also to track whose microphone is open.
Alex?
One thing is that, I mean, we have gone as far as headsets mics, as Bill talked about before, like DPAs, into microflexes, which are, I think, similar to what Courtney was talking about. Shure makes these microflexes that are there. One thing to remember is if you have a boardroom, and it depends on how many people are in the boardroom. So if you have a table here, if you can get people to be on one side of it, you can treat these walls, and it'll drop the reverberance dramatically. So the main thing is you're keeping facing walls from bouncing off of each other, and that's going to. So if you treat this with just, I mean, literally moving blankets, if it just depends on how many people. If they're going all the way around, you can't do that, obviously, or you can and you make it look nice. But we've done a lot of treating those walls, and so a lot of times we're hanging moving blankets at 50% fullness, which means that it, if you think about the pole, they're like this, like a that you'd see in the back of a theater. And when you do that, you can cut down on it a lot, and you can set it up in half an hour.
Next question.
Eduardo Augustine's up next from Panama. He says, my Blackmagic Design ATEM Mini Extreme ISO stopped processing audio entirely. Tried troubleshooting cables, sources, monitors, computer, but still no audio. Is this a dead ATEM, and any suggestions?
Jason.
Eduardo, you said it yourself. This probably is a dead ATEM, and you should just call them. Call them. They are an excellent company to deal with, and they have switched out much of the gear that I've asked them for, even stuff that actually was a little bit out of warranty. But I don't think that there are any Extreme ISOs that are out of warranty at the moment. So yeah, call them.
Alex?
Yeah, any kind of variance like this, I would call Blackmagic. So you want to get to the bottom of it, because you don't want to go out of your warranty trying to figure it out.
And Mitchell?
I was intrigued last week when one of our people said that there's a way to reset them to factory, and not the software factory state, but to reset it completely. That, of course, is dangerous because you could brick your unit. Perhaps Mark Giuliani found out about that, but there's some button, and I won't say what it is because I don't want you to do it, that you can restart it, and maybe they'll tell you how to do that. But it resets everything.
Next question.
Jason James in Mesa, Arizona says, has anyone had experience with the Mac Studio and custom EDIDs yet? I know with the MacBook Pro Pro Max and the M1 Mini, they're struggling with custom EDIDs into screen switchers for LED walls.
Alex?
Yeah, I think that I've been running into it, and I didn't know it until last week. If I plug my Mac Minis into my Blackbird 8x8 matrix, they won't show up. If I plug them in with something else on the other end, the little quad that I have here, they show up fine. So I didn't really think about it. I was trying to figure out what that was, and I think that it has to do with the EDIDs. So I think that there is some kind of handshake there that they're trying to do that isn't. So I've been running them through decimators. So that's how I fix that problem. There's a little bit of latency there, though.
Next question.
Liberty White in Atlanta, Georgia. Following up with Ray's comment about eyeline and looking at your audio, what are some of the cost-effective teleprompters?
Yep, audience. David. David, you're on mute.
Apologies, pressing too many buttons. I use the Glide Gear TMP 100 with a Lilliput 10-inch monitor that goes into it, and it's solid. It does great.
Nigel?
Yeah, about the same setup for me. The one big learning here is you can go for a cheaper monitor, but if it doesn't flip over, you're going to have to buy something to flip that picture over. And what's very attractive about the iPad ones is that you can just say, hey, I can just put my iPad and read off that. That's true, but that might be hard to get the video for something like Zoom onto it. So you end up with a monitor. Just make sure you can flip it. The Lilliputs do that.
That's a good point. George?
So, like David, I'm doing the Lilliput also with the Glide Gear iPad, and that's working fine for me. It's not large, but I could get 4 people inside of it. For the most part, I'm using the output from Zoom to monitor and to keep track of everyone is speaking.
And Alex?
Yeah, and I'm using the iCan 12-inch, which I think is a pretty good value. It's in the $800 range, $700-800. It's a little bit more expensive, but it has the monitor and the frame, and it's a slightly larger frame at the moment.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Ronnie Hossi back in Tromsø, Norway, and he says, what is the smallest and or cheapest dougan automix device with a minimum of 8 input? Does not need faders. Multi-track recording is a plus.
Jason?
I'd say the X32 rack is going to be your best friend on this one. I am challenged to think of anything that would be smaller.
Alex?
Second, Jason. Since X32 rack is the smallest thing, the rack version. There's technically the X32 core, and I think there might still be a Midas core that is 1U that is all Dante. And so if you can find the core, they're amazing if you're a Dante-based house.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next with the Behringer Wing still doesn't have a full manual 3 years after its introduction. Why could that be, and what resources would you recommend for learning about the console?
I'll jump in here and say, I don't know why they don't have a manual yet, but there are lots of resources with like Reddit threads or even like online, the amount of people who do tutorials. So this, unfortunately, is YouTube and Google University. Alex?
Yeah, that's good. YouTube and Google University. Yeah, the wing is. I think that it's probably there's. I bet you there's an argument internally about who should do what and what should be said and everything else. So that's probably the reason that you don't see it there. And the best thing to do is to use it. Like there's, that is just doing projects. And so most of us have a problem with not reading the manuals. But we'll see what happens.
Next question.
Joel in Mumbai, India says, where can I find the old Office Hours episodes?
Jeffrey.
So it's on a different channel. I'm putting the link to the YouTube into Makana right now, so you should be able to find it. But we did switch YouTubes to the Office Hours Global, the official one now.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Next question.
Henry Ramos in Yonkers, New York said, suggestions for good podcasts. Say for fiction, business advice. I'll pass on the true crime stuff.
Alex.
Yeah. So, the ultimate, there's obviously the twit.tv has a lot of different podcasts around tech that you might be interested in. There is the one that is probably the best produced is This American Life. There's also Radio Lab.
Nigel?
Yeah, the Twit stuff. I have to tell you, the short series that I've enjoyed most is called Things Fell Apart by John Ronson. It maybe strays a little bit into the political world, but Ronson is pretty even-handed. But they're great stories about how some of the things that we fight in the culture war, where they came from, and I learned a huge amount.
And go ahead, Alex.
Go ahead, Courtney.
What I like is if you want to do something educational, Answers with Joe. Joe Scott has it's a video podcast on his YouTube channel, and it's always interesting. He does one a week, and he does a deep dive into something that people have been wanting to know, and he does a lot of research, a lot of history. There's a lot of stuff on technology and history and stories and folklore and other things like that. So it's always interesting. Answers with Joe.
And I'll jump in with Jenna Kutcher. It's skewed women, but lots of great business advice. And that's the Gold Digger podcast. Then there's Arlene Hamilton, and it's called My First Million. So she tracks people who made their first million. And then I'm always a fan of Guy Raz and How I Built This, because you always hear about how people actually got to build or do what they created. Alex.
The other one is The Moth. So The Moth is a pretty classic one. It's live storytelling events that they've taken some of the best of and turned them into a podcast. So I would definitely check out The Moth.
Next question.
George E. Kennedy Jr. here in the panel. And is Universal Control only in Mac OS Monterey?
Jason?
Yes. Next question.
That was easy. Next question.
Kenneth Jones, Seattle, Washington, up next. Does the current video capability allow for a drone camera to differentiate an orange parachute against ground colors, throw up a DJI, find the rocket?
Jason.
Yes, it absolutely is. And there are other considerations there. You got to understand, drones are amazing, and they still have a battery life that is problematic, and they are not immune to dust, especially the kind of dust that involves 40-mile-an-hour wind. You can't really do them in a useful way, at least unless you're going to have a lot of drones and a search pattern and actually use a grid, because the higher off the ground you are and the faster you move, the harder it is to see anything.
Bill?
Having spent a couple hours of my life in the back of a pickup standing up looking for an orange parachute against the desert just day before yesterday, I will tell you, you think it's easy, even with drones up. But the problem when you get into the big rockets like we launched on this week, they go up so high. I mean, literally so high that when they're coming down, if they're under parachute, they can drift so far that even finding the general zone with a radio beacon turned out to be a little problematic. We knew the direction it went. We went out, and there were two of us in the back of the truck scanning the horizon, thinking a bright orange parachute should be easy to locate. It was not, and it took us a bunch of truck trips out and a lot of careful parsing of the GPS data. I'm sure John can tell you more about how this all came down, but it was much less easy because of the scale and height of the rocket and its potential landing zone. Narrowing it down was tough out there.
Alex?
John, we have GPS, right? On it. So you could theoretically type in a GPS unit for the drone and have it go find it.
Yeah, we're idiots because we got in a truck right after the launch and we were so hyped up on adrenaline that we didn't take any drones out with us in the truck, in the recovery vehicle, or the GPS coordinates. All we needed to do is have those GPS coordinates and drive right to the rocket. So that was us being irrationally exuberant.
There was a lot of moving parts. Yeah, you get excited. Yeah. All right, I'm just curious.
Completely understandable. Next question.
Gary Lund says the audio sync seems off for most panelists this morning. Did something change today?
Probably that I'm sorry, I forgot to put my hand up. I usually check it and make fine adjustments just in case the pipeline changed, and I didn't do it this morning. So my Mondays are usually the worst day for office hours because I'm usually finishing up like rearranging things that I thought I was going to put out because someone can't make it or whatever. So I was rewriting a bunch of things this morning, and anyway, so that's what happened.
Bill?
I might have contributed a little too, because having pulled my computer for the adventure this weekend, I plugged it back in and noticed that I was on Wi-Fi, and it took me a little bit of time to get it off Wi-Fi and to get it to understand that I needed it on Ethernet. So if during the mic checks we were off, that might have been me.
Next question.
Eric Price is next from Kansas City. When heading out to recover the rocket, we were discussing the DJI Mavic's lack of built-in GPS waypoint navigation. What software solutions are available to program the drone to fly to a specific point?
John?
Jason can answer this one. I don't know the name of that software, but I'm almost positive that you can do that with that third-party software program.
There is one that's used for photogrammetry, but I've never actually used it to fly that way. The earlier drones, earlier firmware would allow you to do this. There has been kind of a redoubling of the effort, both by manufacturer, but also on behalf of government, to take this kind of thing away so that you are forced to have line of sight. And that is kind of a safety issue.
Someone mentioned Litchi in the chat. Does ring a bell?
It's not the one that I'm thinking of. Alex, what's the one that'll just take off the drone and fly in a grid pattern? I believe it can actually fly specifically to a point if you have the right version.
Yeah, it's drone deploy.
Thank you.
Next question.
Stefan Fischer, back from Würzburg, Germany, with DaVinci Resolve. Is there a way to tweak the sound of a single person in a two-person interview between specific points in time? All sound is only available on one channel, Zoom Rec, so how to apply the correction every time this person speaks?
Mitchell?
The technique is not specific to DaVinci Resolve. It can be done in any one, but in many situations where I'll take a single mono track and slice and dice it, and move the second person to another channel entirely, and then apply a different setting to that second channel that might be necessary. But it's very typically done, and it's all about slice and dice.
And Bill?
Exactly what Mitchell said, and I've often heard it talked as checkerboarding. We're going to checkerboard the audio. We're going to go move every other person to a different track or channel or whatever, roll in the case of Final Cut, and then you can apply a universal correction to just those that are labeled that way.
And our last question of the hour.
The last one comes from Douglas Carmichael. I currently own two Dell P2415Q 24-inch monitors that I like. If I'm upgrading to a Mac Studio from a 2013 6-core Mac Pro, would it be worth getting a pair of studio displays as well? I'm mostly an audio person.
Jason?
I think the brackets at that very end of the question answer the question. If you have monitors you like, I think you'd be just fine with them.
Alex?
I believe those monitors are 1080p, so the added resolution would make a big difference if you're opening something like Logic or Pro Tools. So you might want to think about that. Also, one note that people have noticed, a developer noticed, I think, over the weekend, was that the studio monitor has 64 gigs of RAM.
I know!
Or of storage. So there was we think at 64 gigs of storage that something else might be hidden in there, some secret capabilities. So there's no other reason to spend the money on 64 gigs of storage if you weren't going to do something with it. So we'll see. If it had 4 or 8, we'd go, well, maybe nothing. But 64 means that you basically have a very powerful Apple TV built into the monitor.
There it is. And now that we've come to the end of our first hour, we're moving into the second hour where we're going to talk about group group projects. We've had a lot of amazing projects come out of office hours, and this is an opportunity for us to talk about what's next, right, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, and if panelists have ideas or people want to throw them in, you can throw suggestions in as well into the questions in Makana if you'd like. But I think that, one of the things we're starting to see is a pickup where our group is slowly becoming operational. So with the Belfast Method, with the Mobley Process, with the Kaheo concept, with the OH space, where a lot of us keep and birding with Lois, you see us kind of picking up speed and doing a lot of projects together. And so, I thought that it would be good to have, as we come off of OH, to think about the next, look down the field and try to think about things that we might want to try. Or things that we think we could produce. I think that there's a couple of them that are just continuing to, do what we've been doing. So, of course, the Mobley Process and the birding, and then we have the Todd Reynolds Experience, which is every other week now. So we have, there's a lot of these remote pieces. What I thought was interesting about OH was that people were showing up in person. So I think that I think we could do a little bit of that as well. We're going to have some opportunities in the next week or two at our space if people want to come in and play with cameras. We've got a big stage that we've been putting together, and I've got the release to let us play with it before we put it into operation. And so that's going to be it's a big sound stage. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But I think that we want to look at what other things that we'd like to do. I know that I'd like to do more launches. Like as soon as I see something that I see a glimmer of that could be really interesting. My goal now is to go out and research where are all the rocketry clubs and start building a calendar of knowing when they are, because who might be close to a club. It doesn't mean that we're going to continue to come in from all over the world, but we might be able to be coming in from different ones that are more local to us for a more cut down coverage experience, because the more we do it, the better we'll get at doing it. That's the big key.
Yeah. Nigel?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure everyone's going to get bored of listening to the OH space story, particularly if you weren't there. So my advice is be there next time. I think there's a video shot by Chris where he walks around the technology that people bought. And by the way, we don't give enough credit to the audio team who did an amazing job. We tend to talk about the video, but there was a lot of other stuff going on. And I was astonished at the sheer amount of technology between the Tesla X and the audio and Noah's 9 cameras or whatever he bought. And so I think it's going to be hard to recreate that too often, because it was both expensive for people in time and expensive for people in money to fly to Vegas, although everybody worked and mucked in. So I think my guess is that there may be an annual or a biannual get together, but much more than that, it's quite expensive for people. So I think we should look to find something like that. Personally, I'd like to do a 24-hour Le Mans version, either in France or here, and see if we could have the whole thing going for 24 hours and see if we can really kill everybody. I also would like to think about whether there would be a way to start exploring a chat show format, which finds a way to make the experience that works in a multi-panel in a studio work better in a Zoom environment. Because it's still like playing ping pong, I think. And, you have to wait for the ball to pass. And without talking over each other, how could we break that experience in a virtual world? I think that would be interesting as well.
Jason?
Now you've got me thinking, and I want to just put everything that I've got aside, but I will resist that urge and leave it at an open discussion. I really enjoyed the MakerBit tally light. I really enjoyed the playback B. I did the second one after the fact. I just kind of followed along, and it was awesome. I love the idea that I know that what are they called? That the one channel or the one board computers are somewhat difficult to get now, but it's easy to forget that you can just pull out that SD card and put another one in and do something completely different. And it's almost like having a separate cartridge, like a Nintendo, right? You put in a new cartridge and you can do something completely different. Love the idea of exploring something like Le Mans, or heck, Tour de France would be even harder. Rocket launches are another really neat one because they are happening a lot, especially, I would assume, at least all summer.
Bill?
Well, Alex has already mentioned this, so this is nothing new, but I think conference coverage could be one of those things that's really central to this format. We all want to go to a lot of conferences, but it's expensive, the time travel things, everything that Alex has said that Office Hours was designed to make easier for people to bring an event to you rather than need you to literally travel and get a hotel room and go through all of that hassle. I really think that that's something that if we build a team that can go do that could generate a pretty gigantic audience. Because all my whole career, I've gone to a lot of conferences, but there's still more that I wasn't able to go to because I just couldn't afford the time or the money or the mind share to do it. So I think that's still a big deal.
And that would be really neat, just going back off of, what Sky and the Mat in the Kitchen of having people where if talent was in a certain city, like when a conference is in a certain city, while there's the core team, but like who's there, and then them popping up possibly on site and just having this network and bouncing around, that'd be really interesting. You've got my mind going there, Bill. Alex?
Yeah, I think we ought to figure out who is going to who's going to NAB. GDC is here next week, but I don't think we can make that. I don't think we can make that. I know I can't make that turn. It's only 35 minutes away. So I think that that might be a possibility of looking at who's going to go to NAB and who's going to, and maybe we get a coverage and see if we can reach out to LiveView or other folks to see if we can't get connectivity. I think that we had thought about trying to build a studio last year for NAB, or when NAB was going to be in the fall. And I don't know if we're really ready for that yet, but I think that doing something on the floor and touring around could be a good start.
Courtney?
Well, I think a group project which we could all participate in, and there's a lot of people on this panel and listeners out there, producers out there who started in radio, and I'd love to see us put together a weekly dramatic radio show. You're doing an old radio drama, find some old scripts, kind of like Prairie Home Companion, one of those shows where we have people that can provide the music live to mix in. We have people that can handle sound effects, get people to play different characters and work off of a script and just do an old radio drama script, like The Shadow or any of those great radio dramas for the 40s or 50s. I'm sure those scripts are available somewhere and probably free of copyright.
That's really I like that idea. I was thinking something even in the education space and pulling in more of our education community as well. What that looks like, don't know exactly, but I think part of that too would be just like their time and availability and when something like that could happen. But like as a group within our group, I was thinking there's something there. Also getting back to like music, I know we have the remotes and they put together when they can come together, but what we could do around music. So yeah, those, and I'm always down for like game show. I think that's just, I don't know that I've necessarily seen too many game shows like virtual besides like using something like Kahoot, but it would just be interesting to see how something like that could happen. So that's some of my thoughts. Jason.
I love the idea of a game show proof of concept. Over the weekend, I watched Netflix's Is It Cake? And that is the stupidest premise you can imagine. But spoiler, it's surprisingly hard to tell whether or not it's cake. Thought, though, we all have different audio mixers, and a lot of the questions we ask or are asked of us about various audio mixers, I feel like after your fifth or sixth different audio mixer, you start to understand conceptually how signal pathways work and how flow works. So it might be an interesting group project to simply, set up an aux send, set up a loop, and do that on 5 or 6 different boards.
And Alex?
Yeah, and by the way, for folks watching, you can put the suggestions into the questions, or this will be a really short show, and we probably won't bring it up again. So anyway, I think that the building stuff, whether it's cooking or whether it was the building with Roger Wagner, building something out with the Raspberry Pi, I think those are definitely great labs, and we'll probably do more of that. I also think that, we had discussed, I think that going to locations, so there's covering NAB, but there's also covering, we talked for a while about doing a geology one where we get geologists to, look at we could take someone with a phone and just guide them. The geologists don't have to go to the rock formation. These phones have gotten good enough that we could be literally streaming and talking about those things as we go, and but jumping from all over the world, like this is how it looks here, this is how it looks there, but also historical locations. So whether it's an Angkor Wat or a Mayan ruins or a battlefield or something, if we had somebody in the vicinity that can go to that location, and then the interesting thing is, I think experts, some of us could go there and cover it, but also the thing that we can do that you can't do when you go there is that you can have experts from all over the world jumping into Zoom and talking about it without actually having to go. And so I may be going down to Tucson to visit family in the next couple of weeks, and I was thinking, the Pima Air Museum could be really fun of taking, going around the museum. The museum's got all these planes outside, and you could, go and look at them, and then but have experts from anywhere in the world having a conversation about those planes while we're there. So they don't even have to get to Tucson to do it. So it might be something that we try.
Jason?
I love the idea of just take Osmo and, looped in headset and, show a museum. I'm not sure if all of the museums would permit this, but I also doubt that anyone would straight up object unless they were told ahead of time.
I built a whole product around those planes in Pima Air Museum, so I'm pretty sure that they'll let us do it. They especially if we're talking about that we're there.
Well, I think it's a great idea, and I think they would be remiss if they tried to stop it, because any exposure for any museum is, as far as I'm concerned, good exposure, especially post-pandemic. They need to get their numbers back. I love the idea that because we live in different cities, I mean, there are a number of, earlier before the broadcast, we were talking about the Atomic Weapons Museum in Albuquerque, and I thought, I actually know the board of directors there, and I bet they would absolutely let me just walk through with an Osmo and, do an hour of the tour and, have questions by way of a panel. I love that idea for a group project.
I was thinking it might be interesting to do even like something around tourism, which granted anything we do is probably almost tourism because we're a global community, but just the best, beaches, and I'm just going off the dome, but it would be interesting to actually see, outside of after hours, because I know sometimes when people are on their bikes, they might show some things, but there could be something there, maybe even around natural parks or just getting outside and like seeing this world where all of us are. So each person, takes their turn and walks through the park or something along the lines. More exciting, but just to actually see those environments. Bill?
Well, I'm actually intrigued by Jason's idea, and he's taking it a little farther than he heard museum from the Air Museum. But I think the actual art museums, almost every major city in the U.S. has an art museum that's local. They all have interesting little subsections. They specialize in different things. And boy, I think it would be relatively easy to get just a couple of people to go in with an Osmo and a little tripod or something like that so that you could go forward. And then maybe the curator from the museum is the person that you interview, and they could take you on a virtual tour, and you have at least 150 museums across the country that would probably be worth taking a look at, and just make it a regularly scheduled show where either once a week or once a month you visit some place and you look at what that museum has curated and put on display with an expert talking about it. I think that'd be a fascinating program.
Yes. Alex?
I think there's also some process shoots that we could do, whether it's going to a winery or a cheesemaker. We did ones where we had ones where we sent literally, we sent wine and cheese to a lot of people all at one time. And then we actually went to the winery and they gave a tour of the winery, and then we went to where they were making the cheese and we had a tour of that and the whole process. And everyone was online asking questions while they were drinking wine and eating cheese, drinking the wine that they were seeing how it was made and eating the cheese. Now, I'm not saying we could all send everybody wine, and there's a whole bunch of legalities related to that, but we could, think about how things are made. And actually, rather than the short little sped up thing that we see on the TV show of how things are made, we could actually have interviews and get to walk through it. It could be a lot of fun.
Can I assume that show got much better as it went along? As more wine was consumed?
Yeah, it was good. Yeah, it was much more interesting. Yeah, exactly.
The first speaker was a little dry, right? But at the end,
yeah,
right on point. All right, let's dive into these questions.
Okay, our first one, comes from Chris Widener in Las Vegas. He says, since the Starlings work so well, what would be the group think about fireworks festivals? There are many besides the 4th of July.
Alex.
I think it'd be great. I mean, the hardest part with fireworks is getting the signal to really look good inside the camera. It's not impossible, but it's a challenge, and I think that it'd be fun. In my opinion, the best ones are done when you get a drone into the fireworks. It's a little dangerous because
I've done it. It's great.
The funny thing is that the drone, where they're shooting the fireworks doesn't generally have anybody under it because they're shooting fireworks. So it's usually not that unsafe as far as, and I've never seen a drone actually get hit, but there's been a couple of times when it looked like it was getting pretty close, and so, but yeah, fireworks would be a lot of fun. Again, the hardest part is getting it to be, something that we can see well. We really have to use high quality cameras.
Next question.
Comes from our own Liberty White. You in Atlanta, Georgia. What does it take to get a group project off the ground in office hours?
Alex.
Usually you have to get a core number of people that are willing to do it no matter what. What made it work, everyone can have input on it, but what I think part of what makes it work is there's 2 or 3 people that say, hey, we're going to do this. We're not waiting to see if people are going to be able to do it or not. We're just going to do it. And if more people want to show up, they can. And we get out of we're waiting for everybody to show up. And so I think that core of John was going to shoot the rocket no matter what, and then other people, Nigel, but Keenan and Chris both basically were like, hey, let's go on. And then everyone else jumped on, as they saw it coming up as something they wanted to be part of.
Nigel?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there are a couple of other elements to this as well. I think you've got to be sort of interested, not terribly interested, but you've got a sort of interest in the subject. So the idea of a rocket going up sounded like a fun thing to me, so that was something I'd get involved in. The second thing is I think you have to think about what you can add to that. Now, I didn't add very much. I stood around and helped a little bit, but think about what you can add. But I think the core of what makes the rocket thing successful is what Alex said. That rocket was going up whether we were there or not. The core idea, the core element was there. And what we started to build was rings around that, which added depth and complexity and additional thinking. But if the core idea isn't something that gets people excited, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and the reason I ask that is just even for people who might be watching or that are... who are watching, who are in after hours at times. It's like, I have this really great idea and who do I need to ask? Just kind of in a corporate setting, there might be like a form and this and this and that, and just kind of talking that out loud so that folks can realize like, hey, if you've got an idea, just take it from what has been said is like speak up and kind of get some others interested is what I heard. So, all right, next question.
JJ McKenna in San Rafael, California says, could we, my current dream project, do Shakespeare with Zoom ISO with metahumans and faceware in an Unreal stage? I think Epic has scholarships for this kind of fun.
That's so awesome, Alex.
I think it'd be a lot of fun. I definitely think that would be cool. What I would probably do is start with a 2 or 3 minute clip. Like that's the big thing, is something that a bunch of us want to get together and do 2 minutes of some part of a Henry V or Taming of the Shrew or whatever it is, whatever that one is that you want to use, could be interesting there.
Next question.
Gary Lund in McKinney says, what about a call-in show with a call taker instead of chat?
Jason.
That's interesting. I've got a whole rack of Telos's analog phone patches. For those of you who have not dealt with them, are a little bit temperamental and they can be tricky. The part that people who have never done a call-in show don't realize is that it requires tremendously more staffing, but also our model is open to begin with. So it feels like a step in almost the wrong direction, if you ask me. What do you think, Alex?
Alex.
From someone who does a lot of events, you grow weary of calls, or weary of people talking. And on a good day, you get some great calls, and it's really interesting. most people are not very articulate and often more concerned with something that some point they want to make as opposed to asking for questions. And so it can be a little like a call, like the car talk is a good example where they make it work. They're having a great conversation with that person, but remember that person's 1 in 1,000 and they screened a lot of people. And that person didn't just call in with the problem that they had. Like that wasn't a live, that wasn't a live thing, So they screen a lot of people. They have a lot of time to work on it. They have a lot of time to figure out whether that person's going to be good for what the show or not. It's not as easygoing as it sounds, And when you do live call-ins, the diamonds to dirt ratio isn't very good. like that's I guess that's what I would say. So I would say that a call-in show could be really good. We just have to really figure out how focused it is. But there's a reason we don't do a lot of call-ins. I don't do any call-ins anymore for almost anything else, is because people kind of tend to drone on a little bit like I am right now.
Next question.
Vincent Alvarez in Bellingham, Washington says, possible project recreating the game show Win, Lose, or Draw with everyone using their own telestrator. What hurdles would there be?
Jason.
I love that idea. I was reminded of internet radio that I did years ago where we would play match game about station trivia. And it was a ton of fun, and it worked really, really well. We certainly are coming up on our second anniversary and have our own kind of, I suppose, office hours lore or trivia that could possibly work pretty well with that kind of a format. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting.
Courtney?
I think the only I'm not sure about win, lose, or draw, how the participation of multiple people worked into it. One of the problems you have with a game show where people have to hit a button or a buzzer in order to beat the other characters in to answer the question is latency. And if you're doing it remotely over Zoom or something, each person can have a different amount of latency. And so that would give an edge to one person with the lower latency. So that'd be a difficulty in doing something like a game show where people have to buzz in to answer.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Alex.
Yeah, you would have to have the drawing person would definitely have at least an iPad that they can draw on, a whiteboard or whatever. As far as the latency goes, I think that the way we would want to do that is take local time and even a GPS, we have to send it to somebody who's going to be in the buzzer, but like a little kit that's constantly grabbing, very accurate data. And then it manages it in the background of like who actually, delivers a time code if it's that close that says who was first. And I think that could be one way to kind of manage that.
Okay. And Jason?
In my head, it would work with NTP, Arduino, and a pickle, but I could be completely off there.
Next question.
John Snyder in Reno, Nevada is up next. And John says, how much of the value derived from the Rocket Launch Group project was from the excuse to get together physically versus just virtually?
Bill?
Well, I think some of it was. I mean, a lot of us have been kind of semi-lockdown. I know from my point of view, I've spent most of my career doing physical production in the field, mounting shoots, and then taking it back to the suite and editing it and taking things through for our clients. When COVID hit, it changed everything. And I stored a lot of gear, and it's just been sitting there for months and months. The very first time I went out, I had a shoot in Los Angeles, and I was rusty. I mean, having spent 6 or 7 months locked down, I just wasn't as good as I was before. So I found myself hungry to get back out and do things in the real world. I got lucky and got called into a big crew project, and that was really energizing for me to work with dozens upon dozens of people on a very high budget project. And I thought, I really do miss this. I spent a whole career getting ready to be a part of this and work in it. Now I haven't been able to do it for a long time. So and a big component of that was just the interaction between competent people working together to get something done where everybody knows their role, everybody's being counted on, and you pick up tips from these other competent people around you, and you hopefully share some of the things that you've learned along the way. That human desire, I think, is a big deal. And then as I've gone through a few other projects, a few other shoots since then, I find myself hungry to get back out and practically wire some stuff up and use my imagination to say, what's a shot that nobody else is going to get that I could fit into? That's part of what we spent our whole career learning how to do. So not to be able to use the skills that we've developed was difficult through the course of this, and I think that's shared by a lot of people out there who do stuff.
Alex?
Yeah, I think that a lot of times you need the excuse, though. I mean, like going to hang out, like for me, going to hang out is something that's very hard to get me to do because I'm just always busy. You know, I always go, I can't get that done. And I think that having something to do gives people kind of a context for it. So I don't think I think it's part of it, as Bill said, but I think that there's also a component of sometimes it's more interesting to be doing something in action, you know, whether it's building something or, you know, creating something is a little bit more interesting, and you get to see people in a different way when you're actually doing something.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from TJ Asher in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Wouldn't birding with Lois be considered a group project? We're pooling resources from the Office Hours community to help lift the show off the ground. That project could use more participation from the community.
Alex?
Yeah, I think that I mentioned it earlier as one of the group projects that we're doing, and I think that it's a great test of putting Office Hours 2.0 into what we're doing there, and I think that it's a great place for people to, again, figure out using the tools that we have and an opportunity to learn. So I think that that's also the other side of a lot of these things is not just what the content is, but the really figuring out what there is to gather, from each one of those.
Next question.
Chris Widener in Salina, Utah says, there are a lot of great unknown nonprofits around the world that can't afford the kinds of things we do. Would these be of any interest in fundraising streams to support these? Hedgehog Rescue, 3D printed arms for kids, greenhouses in Canada, as a few mentioned.
Alex?
I would love, we've done a lot of work with nonprofits in the past, and I would love to continue to find opportunities for us to support those and learn and produce while we're doing it. The hardest part is always really making sure that we have a good conversation with the nonprofits. Nonprofits can be, as Liberty can be quicksand, and it's just, when Pixel Core started very early on, like, hey, let's target a bunch of nonprofits. I will admit that we stopped. We just, so it really has to be someone in this group that's in a nonprofit that's there. The problem really gets into, there's one big problem in working with nonprofits is that they don't value time at all because they have lots of volunteers. And so what happens is they just drive people into the ground, and then they also don't, they tend not to be decisive. So there's just a lot of decisions and a lot of group, meetings and a lot of things. And then they're not sure. And then in that, along with constantly wavering, makes doing projects with them really challenging. And if you find one that is direct, we want to work with them. But usually ones that are direct and kind of hard edge don't stay as small nonprofits for very long because they're few and far between.
Yeah, plus 1,000 to everything that Alex said, because that's what my brain was just thinking through of like the back and forth. And like, it'd be a great learning experience for like our team and people who might be wanting to get started or try new technology. But the getting in touch with back and forth with stakeholders, those stakeholders, like even if it was our point of contact, they would need to answer to so many other people. However, I do think that it's a great idea. And from the idea of what kind of press that it could evoke for the nonprofit, if there was some kind of schedule of, if we could template it where it's like the first Saturday and you've got first Saturday of the month and you've got 12 nonprofits lined up, and some way that just to systematize it as much as possible, and it's either like they're able to agree to this or not. So I think it's a great idea. It's just, as Alex said, how nonprofits operate. Nigel?
One of the hardest speeches that I ever gave was a best man speech because you're doing it for somebody else on their special day. So the moment we start doing projects for other people, and we have to be sensitive to the fact that it's their thing. And, there's an element to the rocket launch. If the video failed, we would have been embarrassed, we would have been upset, but nobody would have been hurt. The rocket still would have gone up. John still would have qualified. So I think we have to be sensitive to that. The other thing about nonprofits that might want this sort of stuff, you have to be careful that there are people there whose job it is to do some of this, even if it's just an amateur with a camera on a tripod. And so you're about to move somebody's cheese, as the phrase goes. So you have to be very sensitive to the emotions and the feelings around that.
Good points. Alex?
And the other thing is what we call inflation of expectation. So we show up with 20 cameras and do something for them. They can't reproduce it later. So it has to be kind of thought of as a one-off, or we have to think about the sustainability of what we're doing with them so that they can continue to reproduce it. Because I think, or produce something that's similar, but that becomes another challenge that I admit we've created in the past, where we do something at a level that they can't do again, and then they're actually left over time with more frustration than gratefulness.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, what would you think of building a CubeSat and having it launched with the AMSAT group or similar?
Alex.
It'd be great. Like anything that requires a launch, I think I'm in for.
What's a CubeSat?
I think these are the little satellites that people can get up there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a payload. I looked it up. It's a little payload cube that is the right dimensions that can go on to a kind of a shared rocket thing and get up into space. Looks cool.
It'd be fun.
Next question.
Fleety in Bali, Indonesia says, Liberty piqued my interest mentioning tourism. Street food is a diverse and curious topic. If the panel chooses what the participants order, it could be an interesting experience. Ooh.
I like that, Fleety. Alex.
Well, Fleety, if you're doing it in Bali, we're 100% in. So you just let us know when you're going to take us on a tour of street food in Bali, and we will figure it out. That's all I'm saying. Even if we can't eat it, we would love to see it.
Right. Nigel?
Yeah, that just struck me that much of what we do is the same group of people doing the same thing. And what that street food would allow is lots of other people from around the world who are not OGs, are not the people on the camera all the time, to come in and be part of the show in a way that only they could do. And I think that, what is my street food, better title to follow, would be a great way to bring in other members of the community who maybe we don't see every day.
Agreed. Courtney?
Yeah, the topic of street food has been the subject of many cable shows and documentary series, I think, pertain and a world cuisine kind of thing. In Texas, we used to call street food roadkill. So
Alex,
you can always do the Texas version.
I think it'd be really fun to do do a global thing where we find 5, 6, 7 different places in the world that have street food, and literally just jump through it in one 3-hour session that we have X number of people going to somewhere local, whether it's India or Cambodia or Bali or, Kenya, that type of thing would be a lot of fun to kind of jump around the world over like a 3-hour window, just to see how different cultures, what they do on the street.
Jason?
I would be hard-pressed to think of a city that doesn't have street food. Albuquerque is not a large city, but there is absolutely street food here, at least 15 trucks, I'd say, somewhere in the city at some point. The way that I picture this working is, people with just an iPhone and an Osmo can shoot 2 minutes, and that can be used as an interstitial, as kind of relief for those who can't do it live. It can be done live to tape, and then aired between live segments, and I think it would be fantastic.
Agreed. Alex?
I was about to say, and then we can air them between the live segments, and then Jason done that. So.
Got it. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Jack Cannon in Phoenix, Arizona. He says, I'd love to start a project around off-roading and self-sustained vehicle travel, for example, also known as overlanding, panel format similar to office hours. Any interest here?
Alex?
I'm so in. So yeah, if you're leading it, yeah, absolutely. So Jack, if you're interested in that, let's see if we can't gather up some folks. I think that's one of the ones we have to find out how many people, and this is one of those things we have to, with this, the same thing that happened with office hours is that we need to commit to, we're going to do X amount, maybe it's every week, and then figure out how we're going to promote it into that community as, and start to gather that grouping. But I think it'd be a lot of fun. And I think that there's, and I think that if we can get folks that do have some cameras, and again, there's something that I think that we can do if there's a couple of us in any given, there's a lot of us in different cities, is figure out how some of us might be able to support a location. So you might have an off-roader that doesn't have a lot of cameras, but maybe they're in New Mexico, in Albuquerque, and Jason can go over there with a phone or a camera or whatever and stream it. So I think there's a couple different ways for us to use our greater community to support things that with people who may not be as camera prepared to do this.
Next question.
Tlaloc, Miguel Lopez Waterman is up next. Could the call-in method be redeemed if the first screening comes from the questions asked in Mukana? Then a producer reaches out to that questioner and thinks about pulling them into the show.
Jason?
I love where your head's at with this one. I thought maybe one extra iteration of this would be questions submitted via audio, screened, and then if somebody wanted a 2-minute dialogue about their question, they could be pulled in, assuming that they could pass a sound check and have a quick back and forth and then would go back out. It'd be complicated on the back end, though. I don't want to sign anyone else up for that kind of trickery, but I think it'd be a neat show.
Alex?
We've done a lot of them where people send in audio or even video, literally just hold their camera out and ask the question. And that happens a week before, weeks before, days before, and then we cut those into the show. We roll them in as we do the shows, and that has been very successful. So that is a great way to really get the flavor of someone's questions. It also lets us sort out a lot of questions or processes or just even audio and video quality that doesn't work for us. So I think that has worked really well, and I'd be 100% behind that. We have used Mukana in the past where we had a way to bring people in based on their question, and about 50% of the time they went rogue. That was they just, like it's a broken arrow, they either embellished it to a point where we were like rolling, kind of just waiting for them to stop, or they asked a completely different question once you open the mic, and sometimes the questions weren't 100% appropriate. So that's why we tend to. These are the experiences that have kept us from doing.
They had one job.
Yeah, exactly. All you had to do was read your own question, and it was like not what they did. And you're just like, and every time they did it, you're like, really? Did you just do that? Did you just do that to my show? So anyway, that's all.
Next question.
Brandon Buttram in Indianapolis, Indiana says, what about a series of short interviews of the regular panelists? I've heard the start of some really interesting back in the day stories that got cut short due to mic check starting just before going live.
Courtney?
Yeah, great idea. We can call it Conversations with Tony Mobley. He has already done that, and I urge you to go to his website, and he has interviewed a large number of the panelists here, and you can see more in-depth interviews with windbags like myself and a few others. Also, Nerd World with John Pretto has a website where he's done an hour-long interview with a number of people that are here. So there are places where you can find us pontificating for more than just a few seconds.
Yeah, well played. But it does say short, so possibly less than the hour time. But Jason?
Yeah, it feels to me like the goal of the panel is to give to the community instead of working yourself into a lather about yourself. It feels kind of not exactly right, at least from a format standpoint. That said, yeah, Conversations with Tony Mobley. Courtney kind of nailed it.
Alex?
And I would definitely watch Tony's show live. The problem I have is that Tony's show is exactly on the same time as a standing meeting that I have on Wednesdays. But I would, if you can, watch the show because you can ask questions of the panelists or of the people that are being interviewed. And I'd say 3/4 of the people that Tony's interviewed are panelists. And so it's a really great place if you're interested in those. Go in there, watch what they've done. There's a lot of really, really interesting stories.
Tom?
And of course, Lois does her radio show called That's Live on, what is it, KDRT?
Yeah, good call. So it's happening in a lot of great places. Next question.
David Brady in New York City is up next. With the Office Hours space launch and the community behind it, there was an advantage, a familiarity of all the participants. What are some of the biggest struggles in group projects and how are they mitigated? And he says, P.S., go for launch back to New York City.
Alex?
Well, I think that's the real advantage of what we're doing here is that everyone gets a base knowledge of everybody else and we get a sense of each other. And I think it's really hard on a short landing to get everybody to group together, especially in a volunteer project. I mean, if you're hiring a bunch of folks, even then there can be a lot of drama if they haven't worked together before because you find out that two people do not get along in the set. And so those are the kind of things that I think we are able to alleviate with building this large network that meets all the time, hangs out all the time. It doesn't guarantee that everything's going to work, but it definitely improves our odds a lot. And that's why I think it's the more we can do these kinds of projects, some of them allowing people to come in, some of them being all virtual, I think allows us to get to know each other. And in my opinion, network in a real way. When you're working with people, that's how you really know whether you want to work with them or not whether you had dinner or had traded cards.
And just in general, in group projects, what are some of the challenges? That being, communication, just figuring out how everyone's going to stay on email, Slack, whatever that may be. Expectations, making sure that everyone understands the project at hand, but then also their roles. Those are just two of the biggest areas. And if it's global, time zones and just like getting all of that together. But those first two are typically where we've seen challenges, and just trying to work around that and making sure that you have, and typically that is through that sync meeting, or just getting everybody the launch meeting and get everybody on the same page, and then frequently checking in and just making sure that, so if any deviation from the project, that you can try to get things back on track swiftly, and if not, then taking more strict measures from there. Jason?
I was reminded of the term networking when Alex was speaking. I have, for the extent of my career, avoided any time I see something in print that says networking opportunity. That's exactly what I want to avoid. It is just not the way that I work. That said, everything is a networking opportunity if you like the people that you're around, if you like the people that you're with. And I think a lot of us that have worked in production, you get used to getting good at being used to other people, and that too can smooth out a lot of the kind of strong personality conflicts that everyone, I guess, at some point has seen on a set.
Next question.
Chris Fitchie in Tomball, Texas says, what criteria is considered when show ideas are given? Are they based on an individual's willingness to teach or share, or does it have to be something that passes a minimal percentage of interest?
Good question, David. Bill.
I think in the early days, we were just looking to all get together and work on things. So, the ideas that came up first were just ones that somebody wanted to run with. And it, didn't really matter, I don't think, whether there was a big audience or a small audience, because everybody was learning and everybody was getting satisfied with the idea of trying to master this new online technology that we all knew was going to become more and more important, particularly global kind of casting in this web kind of system where all sorts of hosts from all over the world or technical people could get together and do one show in the cloud. That was very exciting. Now, I do think as this matures and we go farther, most things that sustain themselves because they draw enough of an audience to make it kind of exciting for everybody to participate in. I saw it in the user group phenomenon, where if you say, I'm going to do a users group on this subject, and 20 people show up the first time, but in 6 months only 3 people are showing up regularly, they tend to drift away. If, on the other hand, you start out with 20 and a year later you have 150, everybody gets kind of excited by that synergy and that energy, and you end up, those can go on for a long time. And if you get to thousands, they really can sustain themselves really well over the course of a long stretch. That's my feeling.
Courtney.
Yeah, I think one way maybe to look at it would be to try things out in after hours, because you've got 21 hours of time to kill there. And there's a lot of people that are hanging out here there that are not necessarily on the show here every day. And if you could promote it during the regular office hours show, that, hey, on 3 o'clock and after hours, we're going to be trying out this project. Anyone interested, show up at 3 o'clock Pacific time or whatever time zone you're in, and see if there's a lot of interest. And they'll gather there and hash it over, and you'll see what kind of people you can attract to that conference, to that idea, and see if it's valuable for a regular show. And the alarm's going.
Alex?
Yeah, a good way to test that would be also, some of the labs that we're doing. We're going to be doing more and more of the labs starting this week, actually. I didn't get into the schedule today, but it'll be in tomorrow. So we're going to talk about how the websites are being managed by Ken on Wednesday. We're going to talk about Stream Voodoo on Thursday. We have another test that we're doing on Friday at 9 o'clock, right after these shows. And so we're going to start picking that up. But if there's something you're interested in talking about, and again, I think to Courtney, talk to me also if for the overlanding or for anything else people are interested in. I would come to me and talk about how you're using media in your area. We might make it a second hour. I'm always on the hunt for second hours. So that's, suggest that. Labs inside of after hours. Those are great ways to start finding out if there's enough critical mass yet. At some point at our scale, you'll find critical mass for many things. But it is just a matter of figuring out whether there's a core interest.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Kyle Hammond in Chicago, Illinois. I often run into the problem of support production. Many friends, colleagues have great ideas, but the problem is often the infrastructure of getting the work done. How would office hours help with volunteer buy-in?
Alex.
I mean, the main thing is making sure that it's volunteers. So the place things get complicated is when cash is someone's making money on it. So you need to figure that out. And generally, if you're getting paid to do something, then you should pay everybody to do the thing. If you're doing a volunteer thing or something that's out of passion or something for a nonprofit, then it's there. And the key is that you want to get people excited about not only the project, but also what they're going to learn out of it, and what are they going to get out of it. The best, I found that, I've worked with a bunch of house of worship, systems. And one of the things that they do is they invest in hardware, for their volunteers, because it can be demoralizing to work with hardware that's breaking all the time. And it can be really exciting to go in and play with hardware that is cool, better than you could afford at home. And so you see that I think that probably 25% of the folks there, a big portion of why they do it is because they get to train on these bigger boards and bigger cameras, and it's something that they don't get to do at home. And so think about how you're going to do that, or how you're going to organize with someone to do that. And so I think that that's a big piece of it. And then just people have to know that they're making a difference. That's the key.
Yeah, I look at, again, just going back to the group projects that have come out of office hours, and most of them, the groundswell happened when they keep coming on and talking about it and asking questions and piquing people's interest. And to Alex's point, when people see that there's an opportunity to learn or to do something that they might have not done before, that's typically what helps. Also, there is a Discord channel that has, and I want to say it might be more jobs related. So I know that this question's more on volunteer, but just even using Discord, just some of the tools that we do have in place, since it's kind of the question. Next question.
Chris Widener in Salina, Utah says, how hard would it be to have people pre-tape and submit questions via video for a call-in show? Alex is right, never hand out the mic, but it still seems interesting.
Jason?
Not knowing the intricacies of the back end, I'll do my best to answer on this one. A lot of the work would simply be the curation and the coding and the titling. Once it's plugged into a playout deck, it's relatively simple, I would assume.
Courtney?
One problem with this concept is the immediacy of the questions. If you're pre-taping your question and submitting it, you don't know if 10 other people have pre-submitted that same question. So, handling multiple questions on the same topic can be problematic. So it becomes, because of its lack of immediacy of you having to pre-tape it and send it in, by the time that question comes up, it may have already been answered. It may have already been asked in that same show. So that the time delay is a bit of a problematic. I have enough trouble trying to come up with answers just 3 questions ahead. So.
Alex.
Yeah, I think that generally we think of it from a show perspective of, we get a bunch of questions, and then if there's 5 of them that are the same, we look at audio and video quality and, that type of process. So it just gives us another vector to pay attention to, and we'll take the one that looks the best and sounds the best generally, to make that work, or represents a different community, or represents a different location, or represents, there's a bunch of things that we look at if all things else are equal. So I think that it usually is fine for us to get that. We've even taken where we get questions that are recorded while we're doing the show, like a longer show, like a 2 or 3 hour show. We've got a whole team that's just watching the questions coming in, being submitted. and hashtags or sometimes directly submitted, and they're watching them and punching them out. Relatively quickly. The big thing you have to do there is, for the larger events that we've done are like releases and stuff like that they have to do. So those are things that we have done in the past, and it works really well. Like it does, and playing them back is not particularly hard on our end.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next with how could we take Office Hours Space 2.0 to the next level?
Alex?
Yeah, I think that the team did an incredible job on this first one. Like, it was just so many things that are hard, and nothing like dust and no connectivity to really turn the heat up and then be outside in an uncontrolled environment. I think that the thing that we do very quickly is campers. Like, we moved to campers, and so figuring out how to have, because they're great, especially toy hauler campers for production are super useful on so many levels. So figuring out how we might rent those and make sure that it's nowhere near Burning Man, because that's when all the campers go away. And so we once had a production right in the middle of Burning Man, and it was hard. Anyway, so but I think that I think that it's just a matter of having, even though no matter how big that team is, having a larger team working on logistics and working on the show, run of show, working on, the bits and pieces of it, more video. You can't have, we just have to figure out how we organize all those folks. One thing we were talking about yesterday in office hours was the potential of covering all the rocket launches. So there's a whole bunch of rockets getting fired off there, and it's something that we could kind of cut away to. We were trying to fill time here and there, in that area, but that could be something where, hey, and with a little bit of logistics with the other rocket launchers.
Alex,
What?
looks like you might be frozen. But I was going to add that come back on Thursday when I'm sure that a lot of the debriefing that has happened, hindsight is always 2020, that the team is probably has a great idea of how they'd like to also see it go to the next level. Next question.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting then. Douglas Carmichael's up next. What would you think of discussing how to build smart spaces in your home without a luxury budget? And he notes Arduino and other tools like that.
Oh, Jason.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. Arduino is probably not the platform that I would go with, but Arduino to me is more of the one-shot deal, whereas a Raspberry Pi kind of has the horsepower to do multiple things. But then again, it certainly does have the processing power. It's just that's my sense of it.
Alex?
Yeah. I think that figuring out how to do some low-level controls would be a lot of fun, and I think that it would definitely be something that we could probably get enough people playing with. It might be little things like controlling our lights to controlling things around the house, and so I think it could be interesting. I have to admit, because we have Roger Wagner available to us, I will probably stick with the microbit for a little while, at least on my projects, just because I have someone I can actually ask questions.
Bill?
Well, also just remember there are a lot of products like HomeKit and other things that are starting to move into the space commercially. So not only the things you can build yourself kind of as a real DIY project, but just understanding the capabilities of the products of the market.
Courtney.
Right. Bill hit it on the head there. Yeah. The Google Home products and the Amazon Echo products, they have an incredible amount of diversity. There are tons of skills that you can enable for each of those products to let them remote control almost any type of Wi-Fi enabled product out there. And you'd be surprised. You can turn on your TV set, turn to a certain channel, monitor your front porch, turn on the lights, turn off the lights, start something at a certain time. Millions of things you can do with those already existing projects, and maybe a show that would examine some of those specific to create a smart home that's all voice control would be interesting.
Next question.
Next one comes from Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. How could we think about the modularity of the Office Hours 2.0 system in porting this core to other projects?
Alex.
Yeah, so I that's our goal, and so I think we just have to back up and look at how we there's some point where I think we're pretty close to getting office hours to where we want it. And we're going to work on a couple little things, but I think what we need to do after we get it running for about a month or 6 weeks, and we're just not really changing anything, and it just works. I think that the next step for us is to figure out almost drop boxes of, this is how, like a guide on how to build the lower thirds. Here's how you submit the super sources. Here's how you submit an open video, and so on and so forth, so that all of those things can be loaded relatively easily. And then we can start building packages that will load those up. I mean, the goal would really be that we could change literally go out of the show and switch into another show with, maybe a minute. Just hit a button and everything updates for another show that could run for an hour or two. And so I think the first step is getting it to a point where we're happy with it, and we're very close. The next step is, and then we're waiting for a couple of things that I want to do before we start making it more modular, which is isolated audio and a couple other things. But once we get those things handled, I think that we will, the goal will be then to make it modular so that it can be updated instantly is the goal.
And then, so Alex, I guess this would be my follow-up question of then from needing team, and would that be a part of it, is needing to build out more volunteers and team for people who can
I think everybody has to figure out how to do that. I think one of the goals with this is that we get to a point where you could scale up to 50 people as part of a show, including the panelists and the behind the scenes and everything else, but scale down to one. Where a lot of the things are doing what they're doing automatically, and we haven't figured that all out yet. But the goal is you keep on adding more people, and it'll become a better show. But it might be 70% as good with one person as it is 100% as the best we can possibly do with 40 people or 50 people. But we have to be able to figure out how to get it to be able to expand and contract for that.
Copy that. Well, we did it. Another successful show. Thank you so much to all of our producers for your great questions and your ideas. And of course, to our panelists for showing up and sharing your knowledge and wealth of information. Again, if you are looking to join the community, head over to officehours.global, and let's head into after hours now. We'll see you tomorrow.
Great job, Liberty.
This is the fun part. Where we say stuff.
This is where we say stuff underneath. Liberty did a great job.
Yeah, sometimes the comms tell us we're muted, but we don't care.
Well, they shouldn't. We really wish the comms wouldn't mute us, and they would leave us. They would leave us in there because we're doing this on purpose. It should be part of the show.
World's most useless Easter eggs right here.
Yeah, exactly.
We still haven't fixed that claim.
Here's the secret to Krispy Kreme.
It's the sugar.
Okay, we must be off. Alex is gone.
Don't press the play button.
Yeah, don't press the play button. Exactly. All right, I got to go get dust out of my folds.
Bye, y'all.
Happy trails.